This journey that I started on 3 or 4 years ago was because I got a new job. I went from managing 0 people in my job to managing 9 people all of a sudden. So I managed no one. I happily did my job on a little island in my office, and I really loved it. But I'd been doing it for a while, and I was asked to lead a team of people, all different personalities, all having their own difficult issues, all coming from different families, cultures, habits, behaviors, emotions that they are struggling with, some of the same that we might have just listed for ourselves. So they're all bringing their emotional chaos into the office, as am I, because we're human, not because there's anything wrong with us. We all have some emotional chaos that we bring with us. And my history that I was bringing was I just avoided for a couple days. And so I learned that we don't talk about hard things. We just avoid, right? And so that's what I learned, and that's what I did. And if I ever did have to deal with it, I did it really poorly. I hated conflict. I lost sleep over conflict. I was anxious. I had a lot of those imaginary conversations. Raise your hand if you have had an imaginary conversation with someone where you're like yelling at them and telling them what's up. This is what I should have said. Yeah, I've done that so many times, right? Yes. So that was kind of how I dealt with conflict. And so when I'm at work and I'm having all these different personalities, my MO is to just be defensive, to just blame someone else, to judge someone else, to deflect, to over-explain, and to tell people why I'm right. So when people are coming to me with issues, my MO was to be defensive, and I hated being like that. I'm pretty sure that defensive is a way of just avoiding other emotions. And that's what I was doing. I was avoiding fear of failure in the role, fear of not being good enough, shame. I hate being wrong because, again, we're human. Our egos hate being wrong. Richard Rohr says, our ego would rather die than admit being wrong. And that's what I was dealing with. And I suddenly just decided one day, I didn't like myself. I don't like being defensive. I want to be one of those leaders that takes responsibility. I want to be a mom who can go back and apologize to their adult child for being wrong. And so I asked one employee, a particularly fussy one, to come in and tell me what I knew there was an issue between her and I. I knew that there had been a break of trust, or something was bothering her, and had been for a while. And I invited her to come in and sit with me and tell me what happened. And I was committed to not being defensive. I wanted to see if I could do it because I knew that she was going to lean in, and she did. She spent about 45 minutes telling me all the things that I'm horrible at, and all the ways I've been awful, and all the things I've done wrong. It was like she had been taking notes of all of my failures. And I sat and I listened and I said, thank you so much for the feedback. Do you think we can move forward? And I had planned all this out because that doesn't happen by accident. And that's what we're going to talk about. And she said, yes, I do think we should move forward. And a week later, she quit, which was fine. But that was a big, big turning point for me. That changed everything. It was actually quite a gift that she gave me. It was delivered very inappropriately and in a really nasty way, but it was a gift because some of the things she said were right. There were some things that I could do better, and that led me on a journey to figure out how to do better because I never wanted someone to feel that way about my leadership again. So I started to just do everything I could to learn to control my emotions. I was committed to communicating better, leaning into conflict right away when I saw it instead of waiting and letting someone create a list. And so that it was life-changing. And that is what I want to share with you today. Once I learned those skills at work, I was able to start applying them at home with my husband, with my adult children, with friends. It just helped me get a lot more clear on who I want to be, who I want to surround myself with, and what I need to work on. So I want you to know almost everything I was doing in conflict is a habit that I learned. And I've been practicing those bad habits for 40 years or more. And so have you. So give yourself a break if you're feeling that, if you're blaming yourself for bad behavior. It's not your fault. It's your parents' fault. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. It is a result of our families of origin, likely, but it's a habit. We've formed habits that we've been practicing for a really long time, and they're not going to break easily. So it's not your fault that you're feeling angry or defensive or ashamed. It's not your fault, but we are here to change it and to do better. And so here is what we're going to learn tonight. The 3 keys to mastering our emotions, to communicate better, and to lean into conflict are awareness, becoming aware of the emotion, which we've already started doing in the chat. Key number 2 is creating a vision for ourselves, for our lives, who we want to be, and looking at what is holding us back from that. And then finally, and probably the part that you're all really tuned in for, are the skills. There are some skills that you can put into place right now, tomorrow, that will help you control your emotions when there is conflict or difficulty. So if you're interested, as Susan said, in getting more support than this 1 hour and going deeper into these 3 keys, then I'll be letting you know in a little bit an easy step that you can take. So let's jump into key number 1. Let's become aware of our emotions, awareness. If you had trouble in the chat identifying an emotion that you're struggling with, this emotion wheel can help you. There are 2 different sides to the emotion wheel, one that are good feelings and ones that are quote unquote bad feelings, which I also want to make sure that you know that there are no bad feelings. Feelings, emotions, they're not inherently bad. They're uncomfortable, right? But they're not bad because they communicate something to us. And often what they're communicating is that something is wrong. Something is off, either in the environment or inside of us. But sometimes those emotions lie to us because they don't really reflect what's absolutely true. They're still good, uncomfortable, yes, but they're a trailhead to more information, a trailhead. So it's like the beginning of learning more about yourself. And this takes a little bit of digging into your past and your memories to understand. We're going to do a little bit of that tonight. But that's because emotions are usually connected to an experience in the past or a memory. And when we had that experience, we had an emotion or a thought, and then an emotion. And after we felt a certain emotion, we formed a belief around that. And then based on that belief, that emotion, the thoughts that we're now having, we behave a certain way. This is what happens in the brain. Emotions are associated beliefs about something that come from an experience that is stored in our brain and often in our bodies. An emotion is an interpretation of what we've experienced or seen or read. So for example, I have an experience of reading or seeing something on social media of a mom and her adult child, her 20-year-old child, and they are arm in arm hugging in New York City, and they just came out of the theater. And I think, well, they have a much better relationship with their kid than I do. And my kid's never going to talk to me again, and screw that. And I can go there, right? And then I form a thought around that. Well, my kid and I aren't close. You know what? I'm just not going to text him today. That's the behavior then, right? I'm not going to text him. You know what? I'm not going to text him for a week. Let me see if he texts me. Do you see how we just start going from experience to thought to emotions, and then we begin to act out in self-sabotaging ways, really. I'll give you another example. if you were yelled at a lot when you were a child. You might have had, I wasn't yelled at a lot, but I was always chastised for how poorly I did my chores. Cause I'm a kid, and I developed the thought that I was bad. I'm bad at things. And then I was ashamed because I'm bad at things. I don't want people to know I'm bad at things. And so I would avoid any situation where I might feel ashamed because I'm bad at things. And so that loop happened for me. It happens to all of us in a number of ways. And I've heard it described as when we have that experience, there's a little file folder in our brain for, oh, when I get yelled at, is just reinforcing the belief that I'm bad. And so that file folder is in there, right? When I see social media or other moms with their adult kids that looks great, my file folder says, my life isn't as good as their life. And so we have these file folders in our brains. However, they can be changed. We can pop those out of the cabinet and pull the contents out and put some new contents in there. And I'm going to tell you how to do that. It's not easy. It takes some work, but it's possible. Brene Brown, who is a writer, describes this brain science in a similar way, but she describes it from a writer's perspective. If you're a writer or if you've heard any writer speak, they call their first draft of anything the shitty first draft. Like, just get some words on the paper. It doesn't matter if they're not in complete sentences. It doesn't matter if there's no punctuation. Just get some words down, your shitty first draft. And that's what happens to us when we are immature or emotional and we have an experience. We make up a story about that experience. Well, my dad said I didn't scrub the bathtub very well, so I suck. I'm bad at things. And then I have an emotion about that. I'm ashamed of that. I feel that in my body, which for me, I feel warmth. I feel like embarrassed when I feel ashamed. And then I start to have some thoughts about that, some beliefs about that. I am bad. That's a big belief that I have. I am a bad person. And then I behave out of that. I have actions that come out of that. The brain science behind how emotions emerge into behaviors is really backed in the science of habits. We just start to create habits. Every time I receive feedback, I think I've done something wrong. I feel ashamed. I act defensive. So as we become, and don't miss this, as we become more emotionally healthy, as we begin this journey into our brains, into our file folders, we can replace some of those thoughts and beliefs, and we can be reprogrammed. So if you've ever said, oh, that's just my personality, I'm just a bitch, or, oh, that's just my personality, I'm from Jersey, I'm a Jersey girl, so I'm sassy. No, it's just how you've been programmed from when you were a child, and it can be changed. So that's some deep, deep work. I did some of that work on my own. I read, I studied, I took courses, I talked to people, I did more reading, but a lot of this work, eventually I came to see a therapist. A lot of this work should be done with a therapist. But you can kind of get to a certain point on your own so that when you do see the therapist, you know exactly what you want to talk about and you don't waste any time. Okay, so now that we've identified an emotion or behavior that's problematic for us, let's look at key number 2. Key number 2 is to cast a vision for yourself. And that vision includes choosing what you value. And so I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions, and you can pop it in the chat if you would like to share publicly, or you can write it into your worksheet or in your notes. But what is your vision for the future you? What emotion are you having right now that's not serving you? And how would your life be different if you could control that emotion? What does that future you look like that's in control of the emotion? Who are your friends? Who are future you's friends? How does future you react to being criticized or given feedback? Thanks, Tamla. Anxiety is not serving you. So we are going to work on replacing that little file folder with something else. What are your relationships like at work and home? What's your vision of those relationships? What do you want them to be like? Is it peaceful? Is it calm? Is it really super clear and communicative? Everybody knows where they stand. Competence, acceptance, loved. Yes. That's a great vision. Trisha's relationship with herself. Amazing. Okay, so you already have an idea of what you want. Susan says, anchored and centered. Oh, the old thermostat, not a thermometer. Susan, will you explain that to us? Mary said that took a while to think. Buried deep within. That's the deepest desire of our soul, Mary, is to be loved. Go ahead, Susan. Explain thermostat versus thermometer.
Well, I can explain it through an experience that I've had with having stepchildren for several years in sort of a, I would say, dysfunctional way. We related to one another. And so when one of the strong personalities of the children was in the home, everything was operating around that person's strong emotion or energy. And so everyone around became more like thermometers, like reacting to whatever that heat, cold, ice, whatever was. And I just think over time, reacting to others' energy or others' emotion is difficult, or not reacting, I mean, is difficult. And so becoming more, again, centered in some healthy, emotional state would, I guess, help the future Susan to become more of a model of just, again, allowing other external factors to not affect the sort of my insides as much, and I could remain the thermostat setting the temperature of the room or the environment or the group, and just operating more from that. So
I love it. So be a thermostat, not a thermometer.
Yeah, and I guess my common language is sometimes like, he's pissing me off or she's upsetting me. And that is like flipped. Like, I am now trying to teach my children that no one can control your emotions, that you need to be the master or owner and try to like understand them or learn from them, instead of, again, that blame game that we suffer from in my family of addiction and disease and blame. So that was the other thing I just wanted to mention on that.
Good. Thanks. Listen to this. Future me is calm and unafraid of feedback. Oh, Ikram, I hope I'm saying your
Unafraid.
name. That is good. Okay, so casting the vision for your life, I'm going to suggest that it be based on your values. What do you value? We often prioritize our lives around our wounds and emotions. Let me say that again. We often prioritize our lives around our wounds and emotions rather than around our values. Our values should be our North Stars when it comes to communication, conflict, emotional intelligence. I'm going to give you some skills later, like I said, but just know that before you enter into any conflict or communication or relationship, you have to know what you personally value. A value is a way of being or believing that we hold as most important. So I value authenticity. It is a high value for me. I'm just real. I'm just me all the time. I don't want to be fake ever. And so if I value authenticity, then I would never gossip. So I often gossip. I'm not living according to my value when I do that. But it has helped me to define my values, to kind of direct how I'm behaving. And so we're going to give you a list of values. Brene Brown talks a lot about values in her writing. and she offers a huge list of values. It's actually, I'm going to give you all a link to a Google Drive right now in the chat. And in the Google Drive is that full list that Susan is showing right now. It's from Brene Brown's book called Dare to Lead. And it's not comprehensive. There's probably other values. But this is a great way to begin to cast a vision for your life. What do you value? I value authenticity first and foremost. I value my faith, and I value fun and humor. Those are three things that I want to live my life by, are those values. Okay, and so what would you say is in the way of you having that vision and living those values that you've just chosen? What's in the way of that? For me, my defensiveness was in the way. That was the behavior that was in the way. Anything that helped me avoid the negative emotions or those uncomfortable emotions that we saw on the emotion wheel. When I was given feedback or criticized at home or at work or by a friend or in a sarcastic way, I would get defensive, oftentimes lash out, oftentimes be angry. So I want to take a moment, and we're just gonna have a quick experience, just a breathing experience. So you can close your eyes or you can turn your camera off if you would like to. And we're just going to take a minute to think about that emotion. Let's take a deep breath. Just enter into some silence for a moment. And I want you to think about that emotion that you mentioned. The emotion or the behavior, and just sit with it for a minute. What does it feel like in your body when you think about being ashamed, when you think about blaming yourself, when you think about believing that you are unloved, when you feel indecisive, or maybe you're standing in front of that adult child or close friend? What does it feel like? Your heart racing? Do you feel like crying? I get really warm and flushed when I think about being ashamed, and I actually feel a bit faint sometimes. Think about the first time that you maybe felt that. Can you remember the first time you felt that emotion? Maybe it was an interaction with a parent. Maybe it's an interaction with a sibling. It could be the first time you were yelled at. It could be the first time someone broke up with you. Be the first time someone laid a hand on you. Go back to where that emotion originated, because that's where the healing begins. You can keep your eyes closed for a moment. And I just want to encourage you, these uncomfortable feelings, sometimes it is helpful to sit with them for a moment. Otherwise, we're avoiding them. So we're going to sit with it. And then this is where the healing begins. Let's get really curious about that emotion, about that behavior. We're going to be curious about it. And in your curiosity about this emotion, there's a couple things that you can begin to do. You can journal about it. You can write it out, because when you bring things to light, you're bringing them out of the darkness. Bring it to light. Write about it. Write it down. I feel this way, and I don't even know why, but I think it's because of X, Y, Z. Just start writing about it. If you have a meditation practice or a practice of prayer, start meditating and pray about it. If you need to enter into therapy, find a therapist. But I'm going to give you a tool right now that you can start doing in this moment. And these are called the 6 C's of internal. This is the kind of therapy that I'm engaged in is called internal family systems. And so you can begin to heal by trying to incorporate the 6 C's into your thinking when you have that emotion. The first one is curious. Being curious about the way you feel is a doorway to your healing. So if you're willing, you can turn your cameras back on and open up your eyes if you would like. Thank you for doing that exercise with me. Being curious to me is like the first of the 6 C's. Be curious about that emotion. Step outside of your body and look at the person who is emotional. Look at who you are when you are feeling that emotion. Look at it as if it's another person. The defense of Kelly is really like angry in meetings. What is her problem? Like, why is she so defensive? I'm not like that. I'm pleasant. I like to have fun. I value authenticity, and I value faith, and I love Jesus. Why am I being so defensive? And so being curious about the emotion is your first step to healing. And then second, being compassionate about that emotion. And again, viewing it as another person or another part of you. Well, defensive Kelly is like that because she was treated a certain way when she was young. I have compassion for that version of myself. And the other C's are calm, confident, connected, and clear. We'll talk about a couple of those others. So trying to have a practice when we feel the emotion to be curious about it, to be compassionate about it, and to take a deep breath and try to calm ourselves with our breath. Another thing that's really going to help is to uncover the cause of why we feel the way we feel, why we have these emotions that we have. We weren't born with these feelings. Like I said before, it's your parents' fault. No, I'm kidding. We learn these emotions and behaviors from the outcome of relationships with our parents, our siblings, our friends, our coworkers, and it created that little file folder in our brain when we had the experience. So we've been conditioned to feel and act in a certain way for a very long time. And so I want you to identify where yours comes from. And we did that a little bit in the breathing exercise and the visualization. But there's some other ways, there's some more practical ways to do that. And I'm going to show you one real quick, just on a notepad, if I can. I can't see myself, but let me see if this will work. The first way of digging into your past is called a timeline, or actually a storyline. And you just do a storyline of your life. So I was born into a great family. So I'm going to go and I'm going to say that was a really positive experience. So I was born into this family and that was great. And then I remember my first heartbreak was in 3rd grade, and that was a negative experience. So I'm putting positive experiences above the timeline and negative experiences below the timeline. Okay. And then I went to high school and I had great friends, and that was a really positive experience. So I'm going to put the line way above my timeline. But then I had another bad breakup and another bad breakup. I did this storyline from birth to like when I was 40 years old. And what it shows you a pattern of negative experiences below your timeline and positive experiences above your timeline. That's why it's called a storyline. And this is something that if you decided to work with me further, I could walk you through, but it helps you see patterns. And the pattern that I saw in my life was that I really loved boys and I felt rejected by boys all the time. I mean, I loved boys when I was in kindergarten. I just remember chasing him around. And so I know that rejection is something that I thought I was experiencing a lot when I was younger. And I still struggle with being left out of things, not being included in even conversations is difficult for me because I have that wound of rejection. And so just the awareness is very helpful, the curiosity about it and the compassion for that little girl that loved boys, but didn't get loved in return all the time. Another way to dig into your past is called the genogram. This is something that is really, it's like a family tree. It's like a diagram that illustrates your family tree, your family members, how they're related, and their medical history. And if you've done any ancestry, you've seen a family tree, and it's a way to learn about your medical history, but you can also learn about your hereditary patterns of behavior and psychological factors that run through families, because they do. And that's something that I can take you through in my larger program as well. And then the final way is called the hallway of portraits. This is kind of a fun way, if you're artistic or creative, to imagine a hallway of portraits, big portraits. And in one hallway are all of your achievements and wonderful experiences of your life. And you would, walking through that hallway, it's like a visualization, walking through that hallway, what are on the pictures of the greatest moments of your life, right? And then another hallway that you would walk down, what are on those huge portraits of the most difficult and painful parts of your life? Because unfortunately, crisis shapes us more than positive achievements does. And so looking at those painful portraits will help us understand why we feel the way we feel sometimes. Is there divorce in your family, death, abuse, alcoholism, miscarriage, suicide, abortion, affairs, all kinds of painful experiences have led to where you are today. And so this is what a simple genogram looks like. I just mentioned the genogram, that's the family tree. So these are the three different ways to kind of dig into your past. The storyline and the hall of portraits are pretty simple and similar to each other. The genogram is a lot deeper and more involved. You start to draw lines between different people where there was maybe a problem or abuse, and you just start to see patterns that go down through your family tree, so that the genogram is really helpful. Okay, so are we going to let go of these emotions by sheer will? No, it's going to take lots of work. And you can't skip the work and go right to the skills. However, you can start practicing these skills now, and it will help you, but don't skip the part where you do the work on your emotions. But let me go ahead and give you a couple of skills that you can be using immediately to lean into conflict and communicate better with your families and your peers at work or friends. So first of all, remember your values, because whatever skills you practice, you're going to be practicing out of your values, okay? We're going to act out of our values. We're going to make sure that our behavior, when we communicate, when we talk to people, when we say hello to people, when we have meetings at work, when we talk to our husbands at home, when we talk to our adult children, all of that behavior aligns with the values that we just defined. And we're going to go back to our 6 C's again. Remember, we want to be curious. And so now I'm going to say, we're going to be curious about the other person that we are entering into conversation with or conflict with. We should be curious about them because they have emotions too. They're going through something. We want to be compassionate about them. What is their experience of life? We don't know. We don't know their genogram, right? We don't know their hallway of painful portraits, but we know they have one. So we want to have some compassion for that before we go in to conflict or communication. We want to be calm. So we're going to calm ourselves. We want to be confident. We want to connect with the other person. That is the first recommendation of anytime you're communicating with someone, you're sitting down to communicate, you're sitting down in a one-on-one meeting, you're sitting down to talk to your husband or wife at bedtime or whatever it might be. The first rule of thumb is to connect first. Before you give feedback or criticism, connect with them first about their day, whatever. Connect first. You're calm, you're confident, you're compassionate, you're curious. And then we're going to learn how to be really super clear in communicating our expectations. Active listening is another way that we want to make sure we're communicating. And active listening, I'm sure you've all heard of it. I'll just give you a couple tips there, is that when you are actively listening to someone, you reflect back what they said. You're listening to understand. You're not listening to respond. It is extremely difficult. I find it extremely difficult for someone who likes to talk to pause when somebody says, I'm really struggling on this project and I don't know if I'm going to finish it on time. My immediate reaction would be, what do you mean? You could have told me this 3 weeks ago. That's my immediate reaction. Instead, I could say, well, tell me more about that. That's a phrase. Write that phrase down. Say more about that. Tell me more about that. Before you jump into your reaction, ask some follow-up questions. Because a lot of times we have made up the story. Remember the shitty first draft? A lot of times we've made up a story about someone before we actually give them the opportunity to explain. The other thing could be timing. Am I the one to say this? And if so, is now the right time to say it? I'm going to say a word about communicating expectations, and then we'll jump into the workplace conflict and conflict in families. When you are communicating with someone that you want something from them or you need them to do something, it's very helpful to communicate expectations in this way. There are 3 ways to communicate your expectations. First of all, is the expectation reasonable? So for my adult child, is it reasonable that I would expect him to text me or call me once a week from college? Yes, I think so. I think that is reasonable. So that's the first step in communicating expectation. Is it reasonable? And is it reasonable? Yes. Number 2, have I clearly communicated it to the person? Is my expectation clearly communicated? I don't know. I never told him I expect him to text me or call me once a week. He just went off to college. Love you. Bye. Have a great time. And I didn't clearly communicate that expectation. So I need to do that. And then finally, the expectation has to be agreed upon. The other person has to say, okay, I can do that. Or they might say, I think every 2 weeks is good enough, Mom. Okay, so this goes for work and home. You want to be, your expectations should be reasonable, clearly communicated, and agreed upon. And a lot of times we have expectations that are unspoken. So how would the other person know what we expected if we never told them? Another way to check expectations that we might not have spoken, or to talk about a story that you're making up, is to say, hey, can I check an assumption with you? This is something that we use in my workplace now that we've learned the skill. Hey, can I check an assumption with you? I was assuming that you didn't work very hard on that event because you were uninterested. That's the story I made up. Is that true? No. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I had a family crisis that week. And you're right, I didn't work on it as hard. But that's so much healthier than me complaining behind that person's back. Like, what the heck? They didn't work hard at all. And we expected them to. Why don't they know to do that? And so that verbiage, again, is just, can I check an assumption with you? The story I'm making up here is blah, blah, blah. So that's some language for you. That's some communication language to help you. I am running out of time. So Susan, I'm going to skip ahead to how to know that you're ready for conflict. So those are some communication skills. We're going to jump ahead. Oh, I hate to skip that. Conflict in families. Well, I'll post this. This is all in the Google Drive, the slideshows in the Google Drive, the list of values, and then a tool that I'm about to explain to you called the Ladder of Integrity. But 2 things I want you to know. I want you to know when you're ready for conflict, and then I'm going to give you a tool to have hard, difficult conversations and conflict, and then we're going to close out. So first of all, good leaders of families, good leaders in business, good leaders of children are never silent about hard things. And we have been conditioned to be silent. I was conditioned to be silent. Good leaders are never silent about the hard things. Here's how you know that you are ready to enter into a difficult conversation. Again, the first thing you do is connect. Before you jump into any difficult conversation, you want to connect. Does it feel like you're being fake? Maybe, but you still need to connect. You know you're ready to enter into conflict if you're ready to sit next to the person, literally and figuratively. Sit next to them, not across from them with a massive desk in between, or if it's a teenager or young adult, that doesn't feel good. Sitting next to a teenager or young adult is definitely important. You don't want that big power differential in between you. So sit next to, not across. The second one is to be on their side. Be on their side. Seek to understand what happened on their end. What's their perspective of this conflict? The problem, you're ready for conflict when the problem is in front of us rather than between us. It is something for us to solve together, not you did this, you did this. It's how can we make this better? Something needs to change, and I am here to help. I'll do my part. Asking lots of questions. Again, this is the active listening. In faith circles, it's sometimes called incarnational listening. It's when you repeat back, okay, so what I'm hearing is that you didn't have time for that project this week. Is that correct? And so you're asking them to, you're repeating back what the person is telling you. And then ask more follow-up questions. And then finally, and maybe most difficult, is owning your own part, which sometimes you don't know until you get in that room or you get into that conversation. Leaders take extreme responsibility, extreme ownership. Sometimes when it's not even their fault, they might take some responsibility. And then I would say one of the most important things when you do have a difficult conversation is to circle back the next day, no matter who it is. Hey, are we good? Was there, some people are processors and they need time to think about it. And so the next day they might have some other thoughts. And so it might not be over in that one conversation, much to our chagrin of those of us who hate conflict. Circling back the next day is always going to be a good practice for conflict and communication. Okay, the last tool that I want to give you is called the Ladder of Integrity. And Susan is popping that image up on the screen now. It is also in the Google Drive that I shared with you. And this is a way to prepare for conflict, or you could even use it to have conflict. But we start on the bottom rung of the ladder. And this is a tool for just sitting before you have the conflict and kind of writing down or thinking deeply about what you want to say and how you want to say it. The first 6 questions are, this is what's going on inside of me. Right now, the issue on my mind is X. And I'm anxious in talking to you about this because I think you're going to be mad. But my part in this is I should have talked to you 3 months ago about this. My need in this issue is that I need it to be resolved because I'm feeling uncomfortable. Then you go on to tell your feelings and what that reaction, what your feelings tell you about yourself. That's true emotional intelligence, is understanding that you have feelings and a reaction and they tell you something about yourself. And then you move on in questions 7 through 10 to what you value, which you've already defined here tonight, hopefully. And then finally, what you hope. And so this is a way to resolve conflict with someone. And a lot of time, it's an approach, right? It's a value-based conversation. And sometimes you have to prepare the other person for this by saying, I want to share something with you. I would really like it if you let me get through all of what I want to say before you respond. And so you really want to get through 1 through 12. And you don't have to do all of them. You don't have to do it just like this. It's just a helpful framework for you to communicate. I've done a lot of talking, and let me just review, and then I'm going to open it up for a couple questions before I close. Oh, I only have 3 minutes. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, let me do this. Let me summarize real quick. We learned about awareness of a feeling or an emotion and having curiosity around that. And then we learned about casting a vision for our lives and digging deep into our past. And then finally, we have some strategies in place now. I hope that you have some skills and strategies where you can control that emotion in pretty predictable situations. I mean, some situations are unpredictable, but most we know what we're headed into every day. We know our boyfriend or husband or wife. We know we're going to see them the next day. We know that adult child is coming home for Thanksgiving. We know we're going into work and we see our calendars and know what meetings we have. So most of our conflict is relatively predictable. And so I hope you have some skills now to lean into those. Okay. So I have seen when people commit to doing this kind of work that we did here tonight, I've seen their emotions and they're leaning into conflict. I've seen a couple things happen when they get ongoing support. First, their confidence to lead at work or to lead their families, lead in their marriage goes way up. Relationships improve immediately. And finally, the whole culture around you changes when you begin to do this kind of work because people are learning from you. So if you have struggled with your emotions, conflict, communicating when you're emotional, I hope these tools can help you. I hope that you will have more peace and trust in all of your relationships and the ability to lean in when things get hard. I do have a 4-session program that goes into depth with each of these 3 areas and the tools and skills. And so if you want to learn more about working with me in that longer program, let's talk. You can grab a spot on my calendar to do a totally free discovery session with me to see what's possible and if we could work together. And so I'd like to invite you to take me up on that free 1-to-1 session with me called a discovery session. This is for you if you're committed to being the best mom, the best communicator, the best leader at work. I want to help you get there. I'm committed because I've seen it work for me and for some of my employees at work on my team. And so that's why I've created these sessions. So head over to my scheduling link, grab a spot. I've opened up 8 spots on my calendar. Just click on the scheduling link. I think Susan was going to put it in the chat. And there it is, the Calendly link. And I would be happy to just sit down with you one-on-one, get you some support and see if it's a fit for us to work further together. But even in that one-on-one call, I'd love to give you like a little map of where you might go next. I also have a Facebook community group if you would like to join just for inspiration. And I have a YouTube channel with some videos on it that I'm still building and working on. But if you want to stick around for a couple minutes, I am here to answer some questions for you for the next 5 or 10 minutes. But thank you so much for coming and for listening. And I hope that you're on your way to healthy communication and conflict resolution and mastering your emotions. So thank you so much. I'll take any questions.
Thanks, Kelly. If you want to raise your hand or just make a gesture and share anything and stay on for a bit, go ahead and do that now.
You're welcome, everyone. I appreciate you. And if you're jumping off, that's fine too. Thanks again for being here.